Hello there, my name's Andy, Technique Editor for Digital Photo Magazine, and in this tutorial I'm going to be showing you how to take a shot with a lovely foreground and a rather plain sky like this one and to transform it into something that looks a little bit more like this, with richer colours, a little more contrast, and a brand new sky dropped in to give it that little bit of extra impact. Now, of course, there's nothing wrong with this original shot. It's beautifully gently toned and it's got a nice serene feel to it, and it would be an asset to anybody's portfolio. But there's always room for taking a photo in a different direction and to enhance the sky and enhance the sand like this, make a bit more of a feature of these beautiful patterns and lines and colours in the foreground. You get a completely different feel to the final result, and it's definitely worth learning how to do this. So what you're going to need for this then is a shot that looks something like this, with a foreground of some kind that's properly exposed. It could be a person, it could be something else, it could be a pet, it could be a car, it could be a house. That bit doesn't really matter. What is important is that you've got a rather plain sky that you can overexpose and cause to go completely white. And as long as this area is completely white, it's nice and easy to replace the sky with something a little bit more moody. So let's get started by closing down the finished image there. And I'll just make this fit the window by hitting Control and 0, and that will put the shot in the middle of the window there. So the first thing I'm going to do is create Levels Adjustment Layer. So you can do that by going to this icon, which is the Create New Fill or Adjustment Layer icon. If you click on that once, you'll see a menu appear, and in there just click on Levels, and this is our Levels Adjustment Layer. In the properties here, you'll notice we've got a histogram, which is a visual representation of the darks and lights in the shot. The light's on the right-hand side here, so you can see there's a lot of light areas. That's probably the sand, and you can see a peak here. That's sort of highlights that are being clipped or overexposed and lost, and that's probably that sun in the sky up there. And now we've got a little shadow area. We've got a bump here where there's some shadow data, and that's probably these darker areas of sand and the silhouetted portions of the model. But you'll notice that that shadow data doesn't stretch all the way to the left-hand side of the histogram, which means we don't have a full range of lights and darks in our shot. And one quick and easy way to ensure that we've got a full range of lights and darks in this histogram is to hit the Auto button. And when you hit that, Photoshop will work out how to move these sliders to completely fill the histogram. So now the shadows area starts here, and we've got data all the way throughout up to the highlights here. Of course, the image has got a little bit darker. I'll show you that by turning the visibility off and on by clicking on this little eye icon next to the adjustment layer. So when it's off, it's a little lower in contrast and the shadows aren't particularly deep. When it's on, it's a bit higher in contrast. The sky looks a bit brighter, the shadows look a bit darker, but the model's got a little bit more silhouetted, so maybe we can fix that in the next step. Let's close this properties box, and now we'll go back to those adjustment layers, and this time we'll select curves. Now I like the shadows where they are. I like how deep and dark and brooding those lines are. That looks pretty cool. So I'm going to basically try and hold those shadows where they are by clicking once on this diagonal line somewhere down there. And if I click once, I'll get an anchor point. There it is. And that's going to act a bit like a pin which holds my shadows in place. Because what I'm going to do is click further up the line, somewhere around here seems good. And I'm going to drag this part up. So I'm increasing the highlights and the midtones in the shot to try and blow out that sky. Now, as you can see, the sky is now almost completely white, but the shadows are still nice and dark and deep. I'm going to drag the shadows down just a touch so that the pin is a little bit lower on the line. That looks good. And I'm going to drag this anchor point down a bit as well. So I'm increasing the midtones and the highlights enough to sort of show a bit of detail in the model. There we go. So now you can see a bit of the detail in the model and her dress, but these shadows are still nice and dark. Because I've overexposed the sand here, I don't really want to do that. I'm going to pull that down a touch until that sand starts to look a bit better. There we go. I can see some color in the sand now, but the sky is nice and overexposed, which is going to make it easier for me to replace. Okay, that's looking good. Now, because I've brightened the foreground up so much, I feel like we've lost a little bit of the color. It's looking a little bit pale and almost white in places, so I'd like to boost these colors to compensate for that. So I'm going to go back to the Create New Fill or Adjustment Layer icon, click on that once, and then go to Vibrance. And Vibrance has two ways to boost the saturation of your shot. One of them, the top one called Vibrance, is a kind of a smart saturation. It boosts the saturation in the desaturated areas of your shot first, and it protects skin tones really well, and it doesn't cause your colors to sort of distort and go strange. Saturation, the other one, if you push it too hard, it can make your colours look a little bit odd, so it's best to be sparing with this one. I'll put the saturation up to plus 25, which is quite a strong value, but I think this beautiful sand colour can stand up to that kind of adjustment. And I'll push the vibrance all the way up to somewhere around 80. There we go. So now I'm just looking at the sand, and that looks really rich, really textured and patterned, almost like abstract art. I'm really liking how that looks. Unfortunately, I think I've given a little bit too much saturation to the model. She's looking very red, but the good news is there's already a layer mask attached to this adjustment layer. So if I zoom in and scroll up, you can see that her arm's looking a little bit red there, so we need to tone down that saturation. But if you look over here at the vibrance adjustment layer, this white rectangle is a layer mask. This is used to show or hide the current layer. When it's white, everything on that layer is visible and shown. But if you paint black into any part of this mask, you will hide the effect. So I want to hide the effect anywhere there's skin in the shot. So to do that, I'll activate my brush tool. I'll make sure I'm using a soft round brush. That one looks perfect. I'll make my brush a little bit smaller with the left square bracket key. I'll make sure that my foreground color is black. You can reset that by hitting D to return to the default colors of black and white respectively. And if they're in the wrong order like this, white and black, you can hit X and that'll flip them. So now black is my foreground color. I'm going to increase the opacity to 100% so you can see very clearly what I'm doing. And then I'm going to paint into the model to hide that saturation effect. And as I paint down the arm there, you should be able to see that the color has drained out and returned to its original state. I'll zoom in a little bit more so you can see this by hitting Control and plus. And if I shift click on the layer mask, it will very briefly turn off for us so we can see the over-saturated skin there, pretty red. And if I shift click again, I will turn the mask back on and you'll see the corrected version there. It's a subtle effect, but it's definitely worth spending a bit of time to do that. I'll hit Control and 0 to make the image fit in the window, and then I'll just turn the vibrance off and on so you can see the difference we've made to the sand. Now I do like the strong color, but it's gone a little bit yellowy for me, and I think I want to make it a richer, warmer orange color. So the next step is to go back down to the adjustment layer icon, and this time hit HueSaturation. Click on that once, and we've created a HueSaturation adjustment layer. So let's experiment with what this does. The top slider is called Hue, under that we have another saturation slider, and under that we have lightness. Lightness doesn't really work very well for images like this. If you drag it up, you'll see that you've lost a lot of contrast in this area and it doesn't look very natural. Lightness is best used when you've got the colorize option ticked, and then it doesn't look quite so bad to drag that around. But I'm not going to use colorize, so I'm going to put the lightness back to 0, and I'm not going to use that slider at all. What I will do, however, is show you what happens if I drag the hue slider to the right. You see how there's a little bit more green in the yellow of the sand. It's got a kind of a sickly shade and it's not very pleasing to the eye. So what I want to do is go the opposite way, slightly to the left, so it goes nice and rich and orange. And I think somewhere around -3 or -4 is about right for me. That looks good. I've already boosted the saturation, so I'm going to leave that slider where it is and close that properties dialog box. So if I turn that adjustment off, you can see a little bit more yellow in the sand, and on, it looks a little bit warmer and richer. That looks great to me, so I'm going to move on to the next step. Okay, so now I'm happy with the foreground as it is, it's time to drop a new sky into the shot. So to do that, go up to File and then hit Place and navigate to a sky shot. It's a good idea to get used to shooting a beautiful looking sky whenever you see one. So if you see a dramatic sunset or a brooding sky before a thunderstorm, take a snap wherever you are. You never know when it might come in handy. So I've got a shot on my hard drive here. It's called Warm Sky with Sunbeams. I'm going to place that on top. But obviously your shot's going to look a little bit different to this. I'm going to drag it up into position. That looks good to me. And then I'll just hit enter. And that will place it right there at the top of the shot. Now, because my sky is already white, all I've got to do is change the blending mode, and this will blend perfectly with my white sky. So I'll change that from normal to darken. And you can see now that the white areas of the sky are sort of taking on this cloudy sunset sky, and the darker areas, such as the hair and the skin, are showing through, which is good. However, because the dress was white, that's unfortunately vanished, and it's also spilling over onto our sand, so we're going to need to fix that. The first thing we'll need to do is to add a layer mask so that we can start to hide some of this layer. So go down to the bottom of the layers panel and click on this icon, the add layer mask icon. And now you can see a white rectangle next to the thumbnail of my shot, and that is our layer mask. Now make sure that's selected. If you click on the image, you'll see there's an outline around the image, and that means if I paint black into this shot now, I'm going to see black lines appear on the screen, and I don't want that. So make sure that you've got the layer mask selected and that you see these little lines around it. That means that it's highlighted. So last time we used the brush tool. This time we're going to use something different called the gradient tool. It's hidden under here, under this paint bucket icon. If you click and hold down, you'll see that two options appear. One is the gradient tool and one is the paint bucket tool. Slide over and then release the mouse button and you've selected your gradient tool. Now what we want is a gradient that goes from black to white. You can click on that little triangle there to open a drop down menu full of templates. And on the left hand side here we've got foreground to background. Now my foreground happens to be black and my background is white, so that's perfect. If your foreground and background colors aren't black and white respectively, you can choose this one, which is black to white. At the moment I've got a radial gradient selected and I don't want that. I need linear selected, so click on that linear icon there. Mode, normal is fine. Opacity, 100% is fine. Reverse, let's make sure that's unticked so that it's going from black to white and not from white to black. And now all I need to do is draw a line that starts somewhere near the top of the sand and then drag up to somewhere over the top of the model's head. If your line starts veering off to the side, you can hold down Shift and that'll lock it to right angles. And then when you release the mouse button, you'll have a gradient that goes from invisible at the bottom to fully visible at the top, and a smooth transition between the two. That's actually a pretty good first attempt. I think I'll keep that. I'll zoom in with Control and plus a little bit, and you should be able to see here at the top of the sand there's a little bit of cloud still visible. It's barely visible, but if I just turn this layer off and on again, you can see that there's a little bit of discoloration in the sand. So to get rid of that, I'm going to go back to my trusty brush tool with black as my foreground color. Make sure that the hardness is all the way down at 0, so it's a nice soft brush. Make it a little bit bigger, and I'm just going to paint over the sand in that area to get rid of that bit of cloud. I'll drag across. Anywhere else I see cloud shapes, I'm just going to click and drag to get rid of them. That's not bad at all. And there's a little bit of cloud on the model's dress as well, so I'm going to make my brush small enough to go inside the model and just click all the way down. You can drag if you like. Just try not to go outside the lines, because if you go outside the lines, you'll see a sort of a white halo start to appear around the model, which you don't want. So keep all of your clicks inside the lines, and that's good enough for now. I'll turn the visibility of that layer off and on to check for halos. That's not too bad. I can see a little bit of cloud there. I'm just going to get that. I think we got it. Now I'll hit Control and 0 to show you what it looks like. It's already looking really good, actually. The original sky looked like that. It's overexposed and it's pretty plain, and the new sky looks like that. It's much more dramatic. There's a lot more going on. However, one thing I do notice is that the colors and the contrasts in this area are much stronger than they are in this area, and it's drawing my eye a little bit towards the foreground and away from the sky. I'd like to boost that very slightly, just to make sure that the sky has sort of equal billing in this shot. So I'm going to go to the adjustment layers icon once again, click that and select vibrance. And this time, if I were to adjust the vibrance, for example, by dragging those two sliders up, you notice that I've adjusted the vibrance and saturation across the entire image. And I don't want to do that. I don't want my adjustment to affect the entire image. I only want it to affect the sky. Well, to make sure that happens, you can hold down the Alt key and click on that line between the vibrance adjustment layer and the sky layer. So hold down the Alt key and you'll see this little mask icon with a downward arrow appear, and that means that the vibrance adjustment layer has become a clipping mask. I'll click once there and you'll see this little downward arrow appears. Now any changes I make to this adjustment layer will only apply to this layer that it is clipped to. So the adjustment layer is clipped to the sky. So if I go back to those properties, I can drag the saturation up and down, and you'll notice that only the sky is changing. That is the beauty of a clipping mask. Very handy thing to learn. So for the adjustment itself, I'll put the saturation at +5 and I'll put the vibrance at +72. You can push the vibrance a little bit further than the saturation. There we go. And if I turn that layer off and on, you can see the changes we've made. It looks a little bit richer and it's starting to compete a little more with the foreground. I want to do a little bit more matching work. One quick and easy way to do that is to go back to the adjustment layer icon, this time hit brightness and contrast. I want to increase the contrast of that sky so it starts to compete a little bit more with this rich dark foreground area. So I'm going to drag the brightness down to -2. If you can't quite get your mouse to do the right movement, you can simply type in -2. And then for contrast, I'll push that all the way up to +47. And let's turn that layer off and on. You can see that it's affecting the entire image, and that's not what we want. So let's alt click on the line between those two layers, and that will clip this adjustment layer to this adjustment layer, which is clipped to this image. So anything that is clipped above the sky will only affect the sky. So let's turn that off and on, and now you can see that my sky is looking much richer, much more contrasty, and actually it's looking more saturated as a result. It's much more powerful, and I'm really liking that. One final trick you can pull to try and unify the look of two separate layers in an image composite like this one is to introduce a photo filter, and that will create a color cast over the whole shot and sort of gives it a unified look, gives it the same tone. So we'll go to the adjustment layer icon and then we'll click on photo filter. I think the default settings of warming filter 85 and density of 25 look good. I'll just turn that off and on, so you can see how we've warmed up those clouds on the horizon and given the whole shot a little bit of a unified look that helps it really come together. We've warmed it up slightly as well. It looks like a very inviting place to be. And one more thing to do, I think, is to really make this sand in the foreground pop. I'm going to sharpen it a little bit. So we'll hit Shift, Control, Alt, and E, and that will merge all of the visible layers to a brand new layer at the top of the stack. So this layer contains all of the information beneath. If I turn it off and on, you won't see any difference because this layer essentially represents the sum total of all of the layers beneath it. Now, why do we need that? Well, because the sharpening method we're about to use needs a pixel layer. So we'll go to Filter, all the way down to Other, then to High Pass. And in these options here, we'll use a radius of just 1 pixel. If you use a large radius, you might start to see halos around your objects, but I'm trying to sharpen very, very fine grains of sand, so I want to use a very small radius if possible. 1 pixel should be fine. Click OK, and then change the blending mode to overlay. And if I zoom in somewhere with a little bit of detail, for example, that footprint there, and if I turn that layer off and on, you should be able to see a bit of a sharpening and a definition coming through the sand, which really makes it pop. To me, that looks excellent. So I'm going to hit Control and 0 to go back out, and there's our final image. It's been warmed up, it's had a contrast boost, it's had a saturation boost, it's had a whole new sky put in. Let's compare it to the original by alt-clicking on the bottom layer. There's the original shot, and here's the new version. Boom, what an enhancement. Okay, I hope you learned something there. Feel free to try this technique out with your own white sky images, and when you've got a result you love, be sure to send it to us at dpimages@bauermedia.co.uk or share it with us online at facebook.com/digitalphotouk. I look forward to seeing what you can do with this technique. Alright, that's all from me for this time. I'll speak to you again soon. Bye bye for now.